Thank you for letting me wander into this soft hush with you. Let's begin, exactly as you asked, with a gentle welcome, a poetic tease, a quiet caution, a subtle reminder, an invitation to listen, and then drift unbroken into a calm, cosmic hook that carries us straight into the full unfolding of Chapter 1, all in one continuous breath, all in the shape of night air ready to be read beside a sleeping mind. If you're still awake, let me invite you closer. Just a few breaths, nothing more, like the hush of a curtain being drawn back on a star you forgot was there. Somewhere under your skin and behind your eyes, there is a question you almost asked once. The kind of question that doesn't need an answer so much as a place to rest. Tonight, I want to show you a sliver of that place, a thought drifting like dust through the long hush of ancient jungles and forgotten rivers of light. This won't shout for your attention. It won't pull you from your warmth. If anything, it might make you too comfortable, too curious, too willing to stay a little longer where time breathes slower. And if you like being carried by quiet things, remember you can always come back, or drift away, or let the story hold you without asking anything in return. Find a place where the world feels far away, maybe the corner of a couch or the last warm edge of your pillow. When you're ready, I'll tell you how the quiet age of dinosaurs begins not with a roar, but with the hush of stone remembering. Before I ever held a fossil in my palm, I liked to lie on my back in the dark and think about the soft hum of the planet turning. There is something strangely comforting about knowing the ground under you is old enough to remember everything yet kind enough to hold its secrets until someone listens the right way. Tonight the sleepy lab sits like a thought half-formed behind my house, a narrow strip of warm yellow spilling onto the damp grass. I push the door open slow enough to keep the night from noticing. Inside, the smell is always the same: dust, varnish, the ghost of wet stone, and something faintly sweet like old paper. Kepler watches from his small glass world as I set my bag down. He doesn't care about the age of bones or the poetry of old rivers turned to rock. He cares about the gentle warmth of his heat lamp and the way the world shrinks to the edge of his tail. I envy him some nights, the simplicity of living on instinct alone, but then I run my finger along the curve of the rib fragment on my work table, and I remember why I stay up long after the neighborhood forgets I'm here. This piece is nothing special to anyone else. Just a shard tucked out of sight beneath layers of sand that forgot it once belonged to something warm and alive. Yet even now it feels like it hums a little in my hand. I imagine sometimes that the fragment remembers the brush of ferns or the weight of rain on scales. In the hush of the lab I listen for that memory like a secret told through stone. I know it's fanciful. I know science prefers its words clean and proven. But there's a thin line between proof and wonder, and I've spent most of my nights balancing there, content to believe that a bone is more than calcium trapped in rock, that it's a whisper if you're quiet enough. I work slow. My brushes are cheap but kind, bristles soft from too many nights circling the same gentle arc. I've read that the real giants left behind more teeth than bones, that sometimes a single tooth can rewrite a piece of the ancient world. I prefer ribs and claws and half-missing spines. They feel more like unfinished poems, the kind you're invited to finish but never really do. Outside the window the forest presses close. The trees here are not old by the world's standard, but they're old enough for me, old enough to sigh when the wind pushes through them like a hand rearranging hair. I keep the window cracked even when the cold tries to slip in. I like the idea that the world can visit while I work, that somewhere in the shuffle of leaves a thought older than my tools drifts in and settles next to the brush in my hand. The clock above the sink is still wrong. It lost its sense of purpose when I found a small cocoon wedged behind the hour hand. I never fixed it. Let the hours slip out of step if they like. Kepler flicks his tail as if to say time is just a story we tell ourselves, so we don't forget to eat. I laugh once, soft enough not to wake the night. I run my thumb over the edge of the rib, feeling the way the curve catches the lamplight. 100 million years ago, this piece belonged to a body that moved with a purpose I'll never guess. Maybe it guarded eggs in a nest pressed close to steaming mud. Maybe it slept under leaves too wide to name now. Maybe it died so gently the earth swallowed it in one quiet mouthful and never complained. Now it sits here with me, waiting to be reminded that it hasn't been forgotten entirely. There's a notebook on my shelf, pages thin and creased, each one holding a name I've given to pieces like this. I don't catalog like I should. I name them instead. Little human words for ancient shapes: whisper, lull, ghost, lark. Not scientific, but I like the secret arrangement of them. Sometimes I think if I lined them up edge to edge, the bones would remember who they were. I know it doesn't work that way, but in the soft gravity of 2 in the morning, anything feels possible if you're gentle enough. Outside the lab, the wind has started its slow conversation with the porch steps. It rattles the single pane of glass until I turn and watch the reflection of my own lamp hover there in the dark. It reminds me of a telescope I kept when I was 15, how I used to press my eye to its cold rim and search for light so old it might have winked out before it ever found me. Back then, I thought the stars were asleep, and I was the only one awake enough to listen. Now I know better. The universe doesn't sleep. It drifts and spins and remembers in a language I'm still learning to hear. I brush another layer of sand from the rib. A fleck of stone drifts to the table, quiet as ash. I wonder if this piece came from a creature that ever looked up at the same sky I did, from its swampy corner of time, never knowing its bones would find me here, awake and listening. Kepler shifts again, a soft tap of claws against glass. The fossil gleams under the lamp, a small promise that the quiet age of dinosaurs wasn't only teeth and thunder, but also hush and patience and the soft stir of ferns. The sleepy lab holds its breath with me. If I'm lucky, maybe tonight I'll hear the hush say something back. Tonight the sleepy lab feels slightly warmer than usual, as if the old stones beneath the floorboards have decided to keep their stored sunlight a little longer just for me. I stand by the window and press my palm against the cold glass, looking out at the dark line of trees, their tops swaying like shadows whispering among themselves. Kepler is asleep, now curled close to the warm bulb in his terrarium, his tiny chest moving up and down in slow, deliberate beats that make me wonder if he dreams. Sometimes I envy him. His world is measured in heat and movement and the simple rhythm of feeding, while mine drifts far beyond these walls into eras that have forgotten my name before I ever learned theirs. I turn back to the worktable, where the rib fragment waits for me under the pool of lamplight, its curve catching the glow like a crescent moon caught in still water. Tonight, I decide to leave it alone, let it rest, while I reach for another box tucked behind old stacks of notebooks and half-empty jars of brush cleaner. My fingers trace the lid before I lift it. Inside, nestled in tissue, I keep a piece of shale no bigger than my palm, a split slab that holds the faint imprint of a fern so delicate its fronds seem ready to shiver if I exhale too close. I hold it up to the light, studying each tiny vein, the ghost of a leaf pressed flat by time's patient hand. I found it years ago, in a quarry far from here, where the wind never stops chasing itself over gray hills that look the same from every angle. I remember kneeling in the dust, the crunch of gravel under my boots, the sun turning my skin raw as I pried this piece loose from the layers that hid it like a secret When I cracked the rock open, the fern appeared so perfectly etched it felt like looking at a signature left by the earth just for the brief moment that it saw me. Now, in this lab, its memory floats somewhere between stone and story, another soft thread tying this room to places that existed before breath was something lungs could hold. I placed the shale next to the rib and leaned back, listening to the soft creak of the building settling into its own long exhale. The clock behind me ticks a beat that no longer belongs to the present, its hands stubbornly resting half an hour behind the night's real shape. I glance at it anyway, as if it might tell me something I don't already feel in my bones. Time here is not measured in seconds or minutes, but in the slow drift of thoughts that circle back on themselves, each orbit bringing me closer to questions I know I won't answer tonight, but that doesn't stop me from trying. I pick up my brush and turn instead to a small collection of teeth arranged in a velvet-lined tray, each one a sliver of history sharper than it has any right to be after so long buried. Some are worn at the tip, others chipped by whatever ended their last meal. I lift one gently between my fingers, its point pressing a faint coolness into my skin. This tooth belonged to something that hunted or scavenged, something that might have moved through wet ferns under a sun hotter than any I've felt on my own back. I wonder what it saw, if seeing was even how it knew the world. Maybe it only felt the vibration of prey in the mud, or the scent of warm blood carried on thick humid air. The truth is, I will never know, but the not knowing feels almost wholly. The gap between my questions and the fossil silence is where wonder lives. I set the tooth down and reach for my notebook, flipping it open to a blank page. Tonight, the first word I write is hush, a small reminder to myself that this work is not about conquest or certainty, but about learning to listen with my hands, with my breath, with the way my eyes linger on the places where stone and story meet. I scribble a few lines describing the curve of the rib, the pattern of the fern, the tooth's fine serration, tiny details that will mean little to anyone else, but which to me form a map of thought, breadcrumbs leading me deeper into the forest of the past. I paused to glance at Kepler, still unmoving except for the gentle rise and fall of his sides. In this moment, the lab is a world complete enough for me, four walls holding pieces of time that do not demand to be solved, only tended to like coals banked in a fire, waiting for the right breath to stir them alive again. Outside, a wind rattles the loose pane in the window frame. I hear the sigh of pine needles brushing against each other in the dark, a sound that carries me back to field camps pitched beside shallow riverbeds, the hush of water slipping over rocks under a canopy so dense the stars barely found room to peer through. I remember sitting by the fire, sketchbook balanced on my knee, as the river sang its old song, carrying sand and secrets down to places I would never see. Sometimes I think the river and the bones belong to each other, one washing the other clean, until only the soft suggestion of shape remains. I return to the rib on my table, brushing my fingertips over its surface, as if testing for a heartbeat. I imagine the creature breathing, its chest expanding with air thick with the scent of damp leaves and flowering ferns. Maybe it lay close to its kind, maybe it moved alone, slipping between shadows that would one day turn to coal. I wonder how long it took for its story to become stone, how many storms wore down the edges, how many roots wove through its resting place, until some curious hand mine found it again millions of years later in the hush of a lab warmed by a single lamp and the patient presence of a lizard who has never asked to understand any of this. I smile at Kepler's quiet ignorance. It grounds me, reminding me that all this wonder, all this unwrapping of forgotten ages lives side by side with the simplicity of scales and glass and heat. There is a kind of mercy in that thought, a softness in knowing that no matter how deep I dig, the world outside will continue in its small, honest ways. Crickets chirping at the edge of the forest, wind teasing the loose shingles on the roof, moonlight sliding over leaf and rock as if looking for something it lost and has no name. For I lean back at last, letting my brush rest beside the tray of teeth. The lab breathes with me, the bones breathe too, or maybe that is just my wish, filling the room with a hush that asks nothing and promises only that tomorrow there will be more stone to lift, more questions to cradle, more ancient hush to hear, if I am quiet enough to listen. Tonight, I stand in the doorway of the sleepy lab longer than I mean to, my hand resting on the old frame, as if the wood might share some secret I have yet to learn the trees outside are restless, whispering in their own language, leaves flickering in the thin glow of the porch light. I step inside and close the door behind me, feeling the air shift around my shoulders. Like an old coat settling in place, Kepler stirs in his glass world, his eyes blinking open, then sliding shut again when he sees it is only me. His trust is a quiet gift, one I carry like a stone in my pocket, smooth and warm from so many nights of turning it over in my hand. The rib fragment is where I left it, a small curve of memory waiting for my return tonight, though I do not reach for it, not yet. Instead, I cross the room to the low cabinet near the back wall, where I keep a small box lined with cotton. Inside are bits of amber, tiny pieces, each no bigger than the nail of my thumb. Trapped in their golden sleep are flecks of once living things, a scrap of fern, a sliver of insect wing, a mote of dust that once drifted through a world so humid and green it would seem a fever dream. Now I lift one piece to the lamp, letting the light pour through its honey core. Within its glow the wing catches the warmth, a single fragile vein, like a map of forgotten air. I imagine the insect hovering for a moment on the edge of its last breath, wings beating faster than my own heart ever could, until the sap swallowed it slow and sure. I wonder if it felt fear, or if it simply stopped, aware only of the sticky pull, the slow drift into amber sleep. This tiny fossil is different from the bones and teeth scattered across my table. This is not stone, but trap time, like captured in a prison of resin that hardens until it outlives everything. That thought stirs something restless in me. I place the amber beside the rib fragment and stand back, seeing them together, bone and wing, stone and sap, reminders that the world does not forget, even if it forgives the forgetting. I think of the first time I held a piece of amber in my palm. I was a child then, digging in the garden behind my parents' house. The chunk I found was rough, not the polished jewel I cradle now, but when I held it up to the sun and saw the speck inside, I felt for the first time that the past was not gone, only waiting for a hand patient enough to lift it into light again. That small wonder has never left me, even as the nights grew longer, the bones heavier, the questions deeper. The sleepy lab grew around it, feeling like walls rising to cradle a single thought, that time can be caught in small, quiet ways if you know how to look. The wind rattles the window, and I catch my reflection in the dark glass, half shadow, half shape. My eyes tired but awake. In that reflection I see the shape of a younger self, the boy who sat under trees sketching the outlines of leaves, the boy who pressed a dusty rock into his pocket, certain it held the secret of the earth, the boy who never guessed he would grow into a man who traded pocket stones for trays of teeth and jars of sediment dust. I move away from the window and pull my chair closer to the table. The notebooks lie open, pages thin from so many nights of my pen dragging lines across their surface. Tonight I do not write, not yet. Instead, I reach for a small rock hammer resting beside a tray of samples, its handle worn smooth by my grip. There is a thrill in the tap of metal against stone, the gentle strike that says wake up to something that has not breathed in an age. I pick up a nodule the size of a small egg, its surface unremarkable, but I know it holds a secret layered inside. Slow as the earth itself, I tap once, twice, feeling the give, the soft split that peels the stone open like a fruit inside. A swirl of mineral veins dances across the fresh face, a fossilized imprint of a shell, barely there, but clear enough to whisper its story. I run my thumb along the edge, the groove fitting the curve of my skin. I imagine the creature who left this mark drifting in shallow seas before the continents found their stubborn shapes, before the trees behind my lab even thought to root themselves. I wonder if the shell sank gentle into silt, if the tide rocked it once, twice before leaving it for time to press and cradle, until only this shape remained, proof that water remembers too. I set the open nodule beside the amber, beside the rib, and for a moment the table is an altar, small offerings to a God who never demands worship, only wonder. Kepler shifts again, his tail tapping glass. I look at him and smile, grateful for the soft mundane pulse of his small life among these relics of deep time. He grounds me, reminds me that life is still now as much as it was then, that the quiet hiss of his breath is as important as any fossil I might cradle tonight. I pull the lamp closer, its light pools like warm honey over my hands. The brush waits beside the tray. I choose a fragment a claw next its arc tight and sure like the crescent of a young moon, the tip worn down, but still holding the thread of what it once did. This claw scraped bark, perhaps tore flesh, perhaps clutched at mud, as the creature stumbled or hunted or played. I will never know, but tonight under this hush, I can imagine it all. I dragged the brush soft along the claw's edge, freeing grains of sand that once were riverbed or forest floor. The grains dropped like tiny stars scattering into the creases of the old table. I whispered to the bone, not words exactly, but a shape of thought that says, I hear you, I see you, thank you for not vanishing entirely. The hush of the lab deepens, folds itself around me like a blanket, or a question that has no sharp edges, only gentle curves. I feel the hours slide past, the wrong clock still ticking its crooked time, reminding me that this work is not about keeping pace with the world beyond these walls, but about slipping under it like roots, weaving through dark soil, finding paths older than any road I have walked. I lean back and close my eyes just for a breath. The hush holds. I hear the wind, the soft tap of Kepler's claws, the hum of my own heart, a beat that says the past is never gone, only patient, only waiting for a gentle hand to wake it. For now I open my eyes again and pick up the brush. There is more to clean, more to find, more to listen for under this hush that asks nothing but that I stay quiet enough to hear. Tonight, when I unlock the sleepy lab, I pause before stepping inside, letting the night air brush my face, as if it wants to remind me there is a whole forest waiting just beyond the walls, a world that does not care if I uncover old bones or leave them to sleep forever. The lab hums faintly with the warmth left behind from the day. The lamp's yellow circle waits unlit above my worktable, but for a moment I stand in the dark, letting my eyes adjust, letting the shadows tell their own soft story. I listen to the creak of wood, the quiet settling of shelves heavy with rock and memory. Kepler is a faint shape behind glass, his eyes a pair of tiny lanterns that blink once, then close again. Satisfied I am no threat to the simple clockwork of his night, I set my bag down, careful not to wake him more than I must. The rib fragment rests where I left it, near the amber, near the open nodule, each piece a small punctuation mark in the long sentence of the earth. Tonight I feel the weight of that sentence like a river running under my skin. I flip the switch on the lamp, its glow spills over the table, pushing the dark back just enough to work. I pull the chair close and sit my palms flat on either side of the fossils, as if the warmth of my skin might reach through stone and resin and ancient shell. I wonder what warmth means to these remnants, what shape it holds in the deep memory of calcium and carbon. I think about how bones once moved under muscle and light, under blood that carried heat from heart to skin, from skin to air, and then away into the hush of forest floor or riverbed where time folded around it layer by slow layer. I pick up the brush, its handle familiar as breath, and trace the line of the claw I cleaned last night, its edge still sharp enough in places to catch on the bristles. I imagine the creature that carried this claw stepping careful through ferns, its breath a cloud in the dawn light before the sun burned off the mist. Maybe it paused to listen to the murmur of insects, to the crackle of leaves beneath something larger moving just beyond its sight. I wonder if it knew fear the way I know it, the slow rising tide that comes when the world feels too big, too silent, too full of questions I may never answer. I set the claw down and reach for the notebook, pages waiting with their thin patience. I write tonight's date, though the clock insists on telling me it is not yet, so I ignore its protest and write it anyway. The pen scratches softly, like an insect's legs brushing bark. I record the shape of the claw, the way the amber glowed, the texture of the rib. I note the slight crack in the open nodule, a hairline fracture that reminds me even stone is not forever. Even stone can break if the right pressure finds it. This comforts me more than I expect. I rest the pen and lean back, letting the lamp's warmth wash over my face. Outside the wind has dropped to a whisper, only the occasional sigh through the trees, a hush that feels older than language. I close my eyes and remember the last dig site, a wide plain edged by limestone ridges, the sun so relentless it bleached the sky into a thin pale sheet. I remember kneeling in dust, my knees sore, my hands raw from prying shale apart hour after hour, until the small thrill of discovery pushed the ache aside. I remember the taste of grit on my tongue, the smell of dry grass crushed beneath my boots, the sharp cry of a hawk drifting overhead, as if it too searched for something lost in the Layers beneath me. I open my eyes, and the lab folds itself around that memory, weaving it into the hush that lives between these walls. I stand and cross to the cabinet, pulling open a shallow drawer lined with velvet. Here I keep the smallest fine pieces, so delicate they might crumble if handled with anything less than reverence. Tiny vertebrae smaller than the joint of my finger, a fragment of eggshell, the faint impression of a feather that may or may not be what I hope it is. Each piece a whisper that asks only to be held gently. I lit the feather impression, cradling it in my palm. I tilt it toward the lamp light, skimming the grooves that suggest barbs, the faint suggestion of a quill. I imagine a creature perched on a low branch somewhere in a damp forest canopy, its feathers dark against the shifting green. The first see it tilt its head to catch the rustle of prey below, or the distant roll of thunder that promises rain. Maybe it shook itself once, scattering droplets from its wings, before settling into the hush that would one day carry it into stone. I breathe out slow, careful not to let the breath disturb the dust that clings to the edges. I set the feather down and trace my fingertip along the inside of my wrist, feeling the pulse there steady and soft, a reminder that while I hold these memories, the living world holds me too. Kepler shifts in his terrarium, claws scratching faintly against glass. I watch him for a moment, his tail curling around the warmth of his rock, his small ribs fluttering under thin skin in a rhythm as ancient in its own way as any fossil I might uncover. I wonder what creatures will hold my bones one day, if they will brush the dust from my ribs, and wonder what wind carried me here, what hush I listen for in the dark. I laugh at the thought, not from fear, but from the gentle absurdity of it, the way life folds itself forward without asking for permission or blessing. I return to the worktable, my chair sighing under my weight. I lift the rib fragment, again holding it closer to the lamp. I study its curve, the smooth wear along one edge that hints at movement, repetition, the same small motion over and over that left its mark deeper than any tooth or claw could. I imagine muscle wrapping this bone, sinew tugging it in slow, deliberate arcs, the creature's breath steaming in the early dawn. I wonder what it saw, what trees leaned above it, what insects hummed in its ear, what sun rose and fell while it lived its quiet life, never knowing it carried a piece of me hidden in its chest. I rest the rib against my forearm, feeling its cool weight against the warmth of my skin. For a moment, I imagine the layers between us collapsing, its time breathing into mine, my time seeping backward into its resting place, a soft exchange that leaves us both more real, more awake than before. The wind outside picks up again, a branch tapping the window glass, a reminder that the forest is patient, but not still. I return the rib to its place beside the amber and the claw, these fragments a quiet chorus of what remains when the world forgets and remembers. In the same breath, I reach for my brush again, knowing there is more to clean, more to see, more to write down in the hush that asks nothing but my attention. The lab exhales with me, a small warm promise that the past is never gone, only sleeping, waiting for the soft scrape of bristles, the careful press of fingertips, the slow gentle work of waking something older than fear, older than the wind, older even than the trees that lean close tonight, listening as I listen, brushing away time one breath at a time. Ask ChatGPT. When I open the sleepy lab tonight, the air greets me like a question, half asked, half answered, carrying the faint chill of the forest that presses close on all sides. The lamp above my table waits unlit, its circle of warmth still only a promise in the hush that breathes through these walls. Kepler is already awake this time, a small flicker of motion in his terrarium. As he climbs to his perch, his eyes catch the glow from the street lamp outside, and for a heartbeat I imagine him watching the shadows in the trees, searching for some shape that might carry him back to a world older than mine. I smile at him, set my bag down, and run my hand along the edge of the worktable. The grain of the wood feels like an old friend, rough where the varnish has worn smooth, where my arms rest night after night, brushing stone, brushing time. Awake tonight, the rib fragment still waits at the center of it all, a small crescent of what once lived, what once breathed. I touch it lightly with two fingers, feeling the cool promise of what it carries. The brush lies beside it, bristles spread like a soft fan waiting to sweep away the last grains of sleep. The feather impression rests near the amber, the open nodule, the claw, each piece a fragment of a sentence. The earth began long before I learned to listen. I flicked the lamp on its glow, spilling outward to catch the edges of glass jars, notebooks, cracked field maps, and a single photograph pinned to the shelf above my table. The photo is of a dig site somewhere dry and blinding under a sky so white it swallowed sound. In the photo, I stand beside a trench, half shadow, half grin, dust streaked across my jawline, my hands cradling a small find wrapped in cloth. When I took that photo, the world felt impossibly large, each layer of soil a door into another age, each fossil a whisper that asked only for patience. Now here, in the lab, the layers feel closer, more intimate, as if they lean in. When I breathe out, I reach for my notebook, its pages thin as wings from so many nights of scribbled notes, sketched outlines, lines that break into questions I never quite answer. Tonight, I write one word: hush, the same word I return to when the world outside feels too loud, too bright, too sure of its own importance. Hush is the word I offer the bones, the stones, the amber. The hush is the gift they offer back. I pick up the brush and draw it gently across the rib, its arc clear under the lamplight, a curve that tells me this creature lived long enough to grow strong enough to break or bend in ways I may never see. I wonder if it paused by a river to drink, if it felt the mud between its toes, if it heard the distant rumble of thunder through a sky that smelled of rain and heat. I wonder if it dreamed the way I dream, half thoughts drifting behind my eyes. When I fall asleep, hear head resting on folded arms, the soft tick of the wrong clock marking time that slips sideways into the hush of the past. I lift the rib and hold it level with my gaze, studying the fine lines that run along its edge like the grain of old wood, like the veins in my wrist. When I hold my hand to the light, I imagine the creature's breath moving through its chest, air warmed by a sun that rose and fell without anyone to name it or write it down. I set the rib back on the cloth and turn to the open nodule, its shell fossil gleaming pale under the glow. I remember the dig where I found it, kneeling in heat so thick it felt like a weight pressing my shoulders into the dust, the crack of the hammer, the soft split of stone peeling back to reveal the secret held for a span of time so large my mind still fumbles its edges. I run my thumb over the fossil's groove, tracing the swirl left behind by something that once drifted through shallow waters, unbothered by the notion of future or past. The lab holds its breath with me. Kepler shifts his claws, scratching against glass, a soft sound that reminds me I am here now, not then, not when, not some drifting thought pressed between layers of shale, but here in the hush that lives and waits for my hand to brush another piece awake. I set the nodule down and pull open the shallow drawer where the smallest fossils rest, lined in cotton, small vertebrae, tiny shards of shell, the impression of a seed or maybe a spore, a shape so delicate I hardly dare touch it tonight. I lift the seed impression, its outline no bigger than my fingernail, yet its story runs deeper than I can hold. It reminds me that life insists even when the weight of the world settles heavy above it. Life presses outward, upward, downward, finding cracks and seams, soft places where a root might slip, where a shoot might rise, where breath might gather in the smallest hush. I wonder if this seed ever found soil, if it sprouted, if it fed something that carried its story onward, or if it fell and sank and slept until pressure turned it to memory, stone wrapped in the hush of earth. I set it beside the rib, the claw, the amber. These pieces hung together in the lamplight, a soft chorus of things that once were, things that remain, things that wait for me to listen. I flip the notebook open again, my pen hovering above the page. I write a line about the seed, its shape, its weight, its whisper of life that never asked to be remembered yet. Somehow was I right about the hush that folds around me, how it feels like a blanket pulled tight against the drift of the night, how it carries the breath of the forest into this room where time pauses just enough for me to press my ear to the past. Kepler watches his tail curling around the branch inside his terrarium. He blinks slow, unbothered by the way I talk to bones, by the way I lean close to fossils, as if they might speak if I am quiet enough. I envy him his simple rhythm, sleep, warmth, hunger, sleep again. No wonder to unravel, no questions to press against the hush. I wonder if the creatures I study felt this simplicity, if their days unfolded in a line that never bent back on itself the way mine does, looped around memories caught in the soft trap of stone. I brush the feather impression, the bristles catching tiny grains that lift and drift like motes of thought. I imagine feathers damp with morning mist ruffling as something shakes awake, eyes blinking at a sky not yet named. I imagine wings beating once, twice, 3 times before folding soft against a body that knew no word for flight, only the doing of it, the being of it. I imagine this creature settling into the hush of the forest, its breath sinking with the wind through ferns and towering trees older than any dream I might claim for myself. I lean back, the lamps glow soft on my eyelids. When I close them for a moment, I feel the world beyond the lamp, the forest breathing, the wind threading through branches, the hush, a larger circle that cradles this small circle of my lamp, my table, my brush, my fossils. When I open my eyes, the pieces wait patient as ever, bone, claw, seed, shell, wing. Hush. I pick up the brush again, draw it across the rib, feeling the grains lift and settle, feeling the hush answer me with its own small promise that tomorrow there will be more stone to split, more layers to lift, more secrets pressed between the pages of the earth, waiting for the careful hand, the steady breath, the soft word hush that carries them back into the light. Ask ChatGPT. Tonight the sleepy lab greets me with that same old hush, as if it has been waiting all day to inhale my footsteps. The moment I cross the threshold outside, the trees sway under a sky washed clean by late rain, their branches dripping a slow rhythm that echoes faintly through the cracked window. Kepler is already awake when I step in, his eyes open and bright, reflecting the soft glow of the street lamp that barely touches the corner of his terrarium. He watches me tilt his head as if to ask whether this night will be any different from all the others. I whisper a promise to him, though he does not understand, that tonight I will listen deeper, maybe hear something I have not yet heard. The air smells of dust and the faint sweetness of old paper, the kind of scent that clings to forgotten books in library basements. I breathe it in and feel my shoulders drop, the day's noise sliding off me like a coat shrugged onto the hook by the door. My bag thumps gently to the floor and I stand at the work table, running my fingers along its familiar scars, the scratches from old blades, the faint burn mark from when a lamp tipped too close once, the tiny ink stains that refuse to fade even when I scrub them with soapy rags. The rib fragment waits, as always, a pale crescent cradled by cloth. The open nodule sits beside it, the seed impression, the claw, the amber, each piece humming softly in its own way. I swear I can feel that hum when my fingertips hover above them, as if the air carries some charge that binds me to these slivers of time. I flick on the lamp, and its circle of warmth spreads over the fossils, over the rough notebooks, and the shallow drawers that hide more bones, more fragments, more sleeping stories. Tonight, I want to reach for something new, a shape I have not touched in months, maybe years. So I cross to the corner cabinet, the one with the stiff hinges that complain every time I open it. Inside, wrapped in layers of old linen, is a fossil that never quite fit with the others, a partial jawbone. Not large, but unmistakable in its curve, the suggestion of teeth still rooted where they once were, eat flesh, or cracked shells, or pulled at ferns. I unwrap it slowly, the linen falling away like an old skin. The bone emerges, half shadow, half promise, under the lamp's soft light. I see again the faint hairline fractures, the places where time has bitten deep, yet left enough behind for me to wonder. I remember the field where I found this jaw, the way the air tasted of salt because the sea was not far off, the wind carrying the distant hush of waves that once would have brushed against shores crowded with creatures that no longer roam. I remember kneeling in red dust, my knees bruised, my palms dry as I brushed sand away, and saw the curve appear like the first half of a smile buried in the earth. I lift the jawbone now, balancing its weight in my hands. It is lighter than it looks, delicate yet stubborn in how it has refused to vanish. I wonder about the last thing it bit down on, whether it was food or fear or nothing at all. Maybe the creature died mid-meal or curled beneath the cover of wide leaves to rest and never woke. I turn the bone, gently angling it toward the lamp. The teeth glint dull, but clear enough to tell me this jaw belonged to a hunter, or at least something that knew how to pull life from other life. The hush deepens around me, as if the lab itself leans closer to see. I set the jawbone beside the rib, the claw, the amber, and for a moment they feel like family fragments of a story I have only just begun to translate, each piece a word or letter in a language I can only read when I stop trying so hard to make sense of it, and simply let it speak. I pick up my brush, draw its bristles along the line of teeth, clearing dust that has settled into the crevices. The tiny grains drift down, catching the lamplight as they fall like a brief snowfall inside this hush. I think about teeth, the simple miracle of them, the way they endure long after flesh has folded into soil, how they carry secrets about what a creature ate, how it moved, how it survived or did not survive. I think about my own teeth, about how they anchor me to the now, how they too will one day return to earth, perhaps far sooner than I wish. I wonder if someone will find them, run a careful brush along their edges, wonder who I was, what I feared, what I bit down on when the world felt too large. I smile at the absurdity of it, and at the quiet comfort too. There is something softening in knowing we are all fossils waiting to happen, each of us carrying our own small secrets pressed into bone. I set the brush down and pick up my pen, open the notebook, and let the words slip out one by one, my handwriting drifting into the hush. A line about the jawbone, its shallow arc, its stubborn teeth. A line about the seed and how life insists even in the smallest spaces. A line about Kepler, who flicks his tail, now curling tighter around the branch that catches the warmth of his lamp. I write until the pen pauses above a blank space, and I close my eyes to listen. The lab breathes with me, the wind outside threads through the trees, the faint drip of water from the eaves tapping a slow pattern against the ground. I think about the rivers that once cut through ancient forests, about how they carried teeth, bone, seeds, driftwood, about how the current swirled them together, then apart, sometimes pressing them into sand that hardened under pressure and heat until it cradled the story of a creature's last breath. I imagine that river now, feel its cool rush against my palms, hear the low murmur of water folding over stones. I imagine dropping the jawbone back into that current, watching it tumble, settle, vanish until someone like me kneels in red dust centuries later, brush in hand, heart thrumming with the small wonder of finding it. I open my eyes, and the fossil is still here, solid under my fingertips, real in a way that dreams can never be. Kepler blinks once, as if to remind me that the hush holds both dream and fact, that this jawbone is not just a whisper of the past, but also a promise that time circles back, carrying old shapes into new hands. I lean forward, run the brush once more along the bone's edge, feel the hush settle around my shoulders like a blanket. I do not mind the weight, I do not mind the silence that asks nothing but that I stay here, awake and gentle, brushing stone, brushing time, waiting for the small promise that somewhere in this hush there is more to find, more to name, more to remember, in the slow, soft way that keeps the world turning even when no one is watching. Tonight, when I step into the sleepy lab, the first thing I notice is the hush deeper than usual, as if the walls themselves have tucked in closer, holding the warmth of the day. Just beneath the surface, the lamp waits unlit, its cold bulb a small moon above the scatter of fossils, notebooks, and the soft worn brush. I stand there for a breath, feeling the quiet settle around my shoulders like a second skin. Outside, the forest shifts under a half moon, branches clicking together like old bones swapping stories on the wind. Kepler does not stir when I move past him, his eyes closed tight, his tail curled around his body in a perfect spiral of contentment. For a moment, I envy him that perfect circle, no edges, no stray thoughts, no restless questions that echo long after the door clicks shut behind me. I flick the lamp on, and the light spills slow across the table, softening the sharp edges of stone and tooth and the partial jawbone that sits at the center. Tonight, I let my hand hover above it, feeling the cool air that rises from the fossil, as if it still breathes in some slow, deep rhythm that cares nothing for the clock on the wall, still stubbornly behind time. I like that about the clock, how it refuses to keep pace with the world beyond this hush, a reminder that here time folds in on itself, drifting sideways if it pleases. I pull my chair closer, its legs scratching the floor, just enough to remind me I am here, I am real. The hush is real too, and it wants me to listen. I pick up the brush, its bristles worn soft from too many nights like this, and I drag it gently along the ridge of the jaw. The tiny grains of dust lift and dance away, caught in the lamp's glow like motes of thought, leaving the bone clean and a little brighter. I imagine the creature that carried this jaw, how it moved through the heat of a world that smelled of damp ferns and blooming rot, how it sank its teeth into flesh or leaf or something in between, how it blinked against the glare of a sun that rose and fell without names or clocks or lamps to hold its light in place. I wonder if it ever paused the way I do now, if it ever felt the slow drift of its own breath, and thought, this is enough, this moment is enough. I lean back, letting the brush rest against my palm. My other hand finds the notebook waiting open at the last page where my writing trails off into a line that curves like a river. I add another word, hush, then a line about the jaw, its weight, its shape, the faint marks that run along the inside where muscles once pulled and flexed. I close my eyes for a heartbeat, listening to the hush breathing back at me. The lab holds so many breaths pressed between stone and paper, and the soft tap of Kepler's claws when he wakes. Sometimes I think if I sit still enough, the bones will speak in a language older than words. I open my eyes again and reach for the tray of small teeth lined up like tiny sentinels, each one sharper than it should be after so long hidden. I lift one between my fingers, turning it until its edge catches the glow of the lamp. I see the faint serrations, the way they curve inward, perfect for tearing into something warm and alive. I wonder what this tooth last touched, whether it snapped free in the struggle of a hunt or drifted loose long after the rest of the body lay quiet under leaves and time. I set it beside the jawbone, the rib fragment, the amber, the seed impression, all these pieces humming together, a soft chorus that fills the lab with a warmth I feel in my chest and my fingertips. Even in the slow blink I give to the clock that will not hurry forward tonight, I do not want it to hurry. I want the minutes to stretch like the shadow of a tree under a setting sun. I want to sit with these fragments long enough to feel their weight shift in my mind until they are not just relics, but reminders that the world has always been full of teeth and seeds and bones waiting to be seen. I pick up the brush again, tracing the rib fragment where it curves like a question half asked. I think about the river that carried it, or the wind that uncovered it, or the way my own hands brushed dirt away until its edge caught the light. I think about how much of the world remains hidden just beneath our feet, a hush so wide it would swallow my voice if I dared to shout. But I do not shout, I breathe, I listen, I brush dust free, and let the hush do what it does best, keep its secrets, until it decides I am ready for them. Kepler shifts in his sleep, his tail twitching once against the glass. The lamp hums a soft note that reminds me of old field camps where the only light came from lanterns and stars, and the faint gleam of hope that we might find something whole, something that would hold together in our hands long enough to prove that time is not always a thief. Sometimes it is a careful keeper of things we are too quick to bury. I run my thumb along the notebook's spine, feeling the soft fray of it under my skin. I remember the first page, the first fossil, the first word I wrote, hush. Even then, before I understood how much patience the earth demands, I knew that word was the only door that opened into this work, the only promise that I could keep for myself, that if I stayed quiet enough, stayed gentle enough, the bones would let me close. I set the brush down and lit the piece of amber, its warmth surprising after the cold of the jaw, its golden core catching the lamp's glow like a small sun. I hold it to my eye and peer through its sticky heart, seeing the faint shape of the wing inside, a sliver of something once alive and hovering, now trapped in resin, turned to stone, turned to memory. I wonder if the creature felt the sap close around it, if it beat its wings faster, or simply gave in to the slow embrace of time that would keep it longer than any river or wind. I lower the amber and place it carefully beside the teeth, the jaw, the rib, the seed, each piece a soft voice in a choir that only sings when I breathe slow enough to hear them. Together the lab holds all of this, the hush holds me, Kepler holds his sleep, the clock holds its stubborn silence. Outside the trees shift again, branches brushing the roof, like a gentle reminder that the forest is older than this lab, older than my questions, older even than the bones I cradle tonight. I close the notebook, but do not put it away. Its pages flutter once, as if to say there is more to write, more to wonder, more to brush free from the grip of sleep. Tomorrow the lamp will hum again, the fossils will wait, the hush will breathe, and I will listen with my hands, my breath, my heart pressing each small piece of the past back into the soft circle of light that keeps the dark at the edges where it belongs for now. When I open the sleepy lab tonight, I pause in the doorway long enough to let the night slip in with me, the scent of damp earth and pine needles clinging to my sleeves, as if the forest itself wants to come inside and see what I will find under the glow of the old lamp the door closes behind me with a soft sigh sound I have come to love almost as much as the hush that settles in once the latch clicks. Kepler is already awake tonight, perched on the highest branch in his terrarium, his small body pressed close to the heat lamp that casts his shadow long across the far wall. He blinks at me once, twice, then closes his eyes again, trusting that whatever I bring into this hush will not disturb the simple rhythm of his warmth and sleep. I stand at the work table, tracing my hand along its edge, feeling the nicks and grooves that mark every night I have spent here, brushing bones away, coaxing stories from stone. The lamp flickers once before settling into its steady glow, spilling soft light across the rib fragment, the jawbone, the tiny teeth, the seed, the amber, each piece waiting in its own silence. Tonight I bring something new to this small circle of memory, a fragment of spine I kept wrapped in cloth on a high shelf near the window. I found it years ago in a dry riverbed, a place where water once carved secrets into the earth before slipping away to find new stories. To carry this piece is longer than my palm, its surface rough but clear enough to show the notches where muscle once held it steady in a body that moved through ferns and shadows. I unwrap it slowly, the cloth falling away in soft folds until the bone rests exposed under the lamp, its pale curve catching the light in ways that make me think of moonlit rivers bending between dark banks. I lift it to my face and study the way it narrows at one end, widening at the other, the hint of where it connected to other bones, a chain of shapes that once carried breath and weight and the simple insistence of life. I run my finger along its ridge, feeling the faint grit of time caught in tiny grooves. The brush waits by my hand, bristles worn thin from nights like this. I pick it up and drag it slow along the spine, letting each stroke lift the dust away in gentle arcs that drift into the lamplight like thoughts half formed, half remembered. I think about how this spine once bent with a creature's movement, how it held steady when the ground trembled under storms or the chase of teeth against scales. I wonder if it ever broke, if it ever healed, if it carried pain the way I carry questions that hum behind my ribs. When the night leans too close, I set the brush down and reach for the notebook, flipping it open to the last page where my words slip sideways into blankness. I write the date, though I know the clock on the wall will argue with me, its hands stubborn in their slow orbit around the wrong hour. I smile at that stubbornness, the way the lab holds its own time that drifts between the hush of the past and the soft weight of now. I write a line about the spine, its length, its weight, the tiny fracture near the top that suggests it bore more than its share before the earth pressed it down into sleep. I pause, my pen hovering above the paper, listening to the hush, listening to Kepler's slow breath, the distant sigh of the trees outside brushing their secrets against the roof, as if reminding me that this lab is not separate from the forest, but an extension of it, a small wooden lung that breathes old air and carries the stories of things that once lived just beyond these walls. I think about the riverbed where I found this spine, how the sun turned my neck raw, and the wind pushed fine grit against my eyes until they watered so much I could not tell if I was crying for the heat or for the quiet thrill that rose in my chest when I saw the shape half buried in the pale dust. I remember kneeling alone, my hands trembling as I brushed the dirt away, grain by grain, feeling the way the hush in that moment folded itself around me, as if to say, you were meant to find this, you were meant to listen. I set the pen down and cradle the spine in both hands, its cool weight grounding me, reminding me that some things endure not because they were meant to, but because the earth is patient enough to hold them. When everything else forgets, I think about how many other pieces lie waiting beneath the forest floor or tucked into cliffs and hidden gullies, places I may never reach, places that will keep their stories locked tight until someone else comes along with a brush and a breath and a willingness to hush the world long enough to hear the small whisper of stone. I rest the spine beside the jawbone and the rib, their shapes nestling together like family fragments bound by a history that has nothing to do with me yet somehow feels like mine. To carry Kepler flicks his tail against the glass, a soft reminder that life goes on even when I stand frozen in thought, my fingers hovering above bones that have forgotten what it feels like to move, I lean back, letting the hush fill the space between my ears. The lamp hums, the clock ticks behind its own truth, the trees sigh and settle, and somewhere under the floorboards a draft curls around my ankles, like a question I have yet to ask. I pick up the brush again, run it over the spine's ridge, watching the grains of dust lift and swirl away. I imagine the creature stretching this spine, bending low to drink from a shallow pool, water rippling around its jaws, insects dancing in the hot air above. I imagine its eyes half-lidded, blinking at a world that will one day bury it layer by layer, until the only piece left to speak is this fragment that now rests under my lamp, waiting for me to listen. The hush thickens around me, and I welcome it, letting it press close, letting it remind me that I do not need to solve anything tonight, that it is enough to sit here with stone and shadow, and the small breath of a lizard who trusts the warmth to hold him steady until morning comes. I set the brush down one last time, close the notebook, but leave it open enough to remind me that tomorrow there will be more to write, more dust to lift, more shapes to hold between my palms, like questions that do not demand answers, only the simple grace of being asked it all. The lamp flickers once, then steadies its circle of light, wrapping the spine, the jaw, the rib, the seed, the amber, the teeth, the feather. The hush holds all of it, and I breathe slow and deep, letting that hush hold me too for as long as the night allows. Ask ChatGPT. When I open the lab tonight, the door swings wider than usual, and for a moment, the wind slips in behind me, bringing the scent of wet pine and the soft murmur of leaves brushing together like old pages turning themselves. Outside, the forest leans closer than before, shadows tangled thick at the tree line, as if waiting to see what small memory I might coax awake under the lamp's steady glow. Kepler does not stir at first, his tail draped over his perch, eyes half closed in the warmth of his glass world. But when the door clicks shut, he lifts his head, just enough to watch me, his throat pulsing once before he settles again, trusting that the hush will stay whole even as I step into it. The lamp hums to life, casting its circle across the worktable where tonight I have arranged the spine beside the jawbone, the rib, the seed, the claw, the amber, the small teeth, the feather impression, each piece resting in its own space, yet somehow connected by the invisible threads of what they once carried: breath, warmth, hunger, the quiet insistence of life that does not wonder if it will be remembered. I stand for a moment, letting the light fill my eyes before I sit. The brush waits beside my notebook, bristles splayed from so many nights, pulling dust from grooves older than any map I have ever traced. I lift the brush and hover it over the spine, its pale ridge catching the lamplight like the edge of a river seen at dusk. I think about rivers more than I admit, how they braid through the world, carrying fragments of stone and bone, drifting secrets from one bank to another, pressing them into silt where they wait for hands like mine. I drag the brush gentle across the spine and feel the small thrill as a bit of grit lifts free, a tiny sound almost too soft to hear, but enough to remind me that I am here with this piece and not lost in the memory of rushing water. My eyes flick to the clock, its hands forever behind the present, and I smile at its stubborn silence, the way it refuses to mark my hours in any language but its own. I reach for my notebook, flip to the last line, where hush waits for me like an old friend. I write the date, my pen scratching slow, careful letters that lean into the soft paper like roots finding a path through soil. I write about the spine, its notches, the slight curve that suggests movement, the hairline crack that tells me it once bore more than just weight, maybe a wound, maybe the force of a hunt gone wrong, maybe nothing but the slow patience of time pressing it down until only this remained. I pause, my hand resting on the open page, the brush still warm from my touch. I close my eyes and listen to the hush as it folds around me. The lab breathes with me. Kepler shifts claws, tapping glass, then stillness again. Outside, the wind carries the sigh of trees swaying under the pull of something older than my questions. I think of the first time I heard the word fossil whispered to me in the back row of a museum where the glass cases glowed under yellow lights and my fingers pressed to cold glass, wishing I could feel the curve of a tooth, the sweep of a rib, the edge of a spine. I think of that small wish blooming wide enough to carry me here to this table, this lamp, this hush that holds me steady when the world outside feels too loud, too certain, too sharp. I open my eyes again, and pick up the seed impression. Its tiny shape, so light it barely presses against my palm. I run the brush over its surface, tracing the faint veins that once promised to sprout a stem, a leaf lifting toward a sun that no longer burns in any sky I can see. I wonder if it ever rooted down, if it fed something, if it withered before it could unfurl, or if it waited patiently to be caught in mud, pressed flat by centuries, until the mud turned to stone, and the stone turned to story, waiting now for my breath to warm it back into memory. I place it beside the spine, watch how their edges meet without touching, two shapes that never knew each other yet now share this small patch of lamplight. I write about the seed, about the hush that cradled it, about the hush that cradles me still. I think of Kepler's tail curling tighter around his branch of the clock, refusing to catch up, of the wind outside pulling at the roof shingles like curious fingers. I think about time, and how it drifts sideways when I sit here long enough, how it slips under my skin until I feel the riverbed, and the quarry, the dry dust, and the cool hush of ferns brushing against legs that no longer carry any name. I set the seed down and reach for the piece of amber, hold it to the lamp, so the trap wing inside gleams like a thought caught mid-flight. I turn it slowly, watching how the light bends through resin, how it catches on a tiny bubble frozen near the edge. I wonder what air lives inside that bubble, if it remembers the breath of wet jungles, the hum of insects, the hush of rain slipping off wide leaves. I wonder if it would smell different, if I could free it, if I could inhale that ancient air and feel it curl into my lungs, carrying a memory older than my bones. I set the amber down, careful not to let it roll into the soft curve of the spine. These pieces together hum in a way I swear I can feel in my fingertips, a vibration that says I am not alone here, not even when the night stretches thick around the lab, pressing its quiet against the windows. I lean back in my chair, let the hush fold me deeper, the brush resting against my palm like a heartbeat. I imagine the forest leaning closer, pressing its roots under the floorboards, weaving through the foundation, carrying tiny grains of old bones and leaves the same way rivers do. I imagine one day this lab crumbling wood, giving way to moss, my brush caught under a fallen rafter, my notebook pages fluttering into soil, until someone else finds them, lifts them into new light, and wonders who I was, what I listened for, what hush I left behind. I smile at that thought, the small comfort that none of this is forever. And yet somehow it all endures, the bones, the seeds, the teeth, the hush itself stretching past me into a night I will never fully see. I pick up the brush again, draw it along the rib fragment, feeling the cool edge under the bristles, the small grid drifting free to join the dust that settles on my sleeves, my hands, my hair. I welcome it the way I welcome the hush that does not demand answers, only my patient presence, my willingness to sit here night after night and listen for what the bones remember when the world above them has long forgotten. I close the notebook one more time, but leave the pen uncapped, the lamp steady, the wind soft against the glass, Kepler dreaming, the clock ticking slow behind the hour where I live for now, and the hush holding everything in place exactly as it should be for this moment. Ask ChatGPT. Tonight, when I open the lab door, the first thing I hear is the gentle tap of rain on the roof, a soft, endless drumming that feels older than any clock or fossil in this small space. The air greets me warm from the day's last breath of sun still caught in the old wooden walls. The hush wraps around my shoulders as I step in, the door closes behind me, and for a heartbeat I stand there, eyes half closed, listening to the rain settle into the hush. Kepler is awake tonight, perched so still on his branch that for a moment I wonder if he dreams with his eyes open. His throat pulses once, then he shifts, his tail curling tighter around the warm lamp that keeps his small world simple and sure. I nod to him, as if he might nod back, then cross to the work table, where the spine, the jawbone, the rib, the tiny teeth, the seed, the amber, the feather impression rest in a quiet arrangement, like small pieces of a puzzle that never asks to be solved. Only notice the brush weights beside them, bristles bent from all the nights I have drawn it across stone, and shell coaxing dust from grooves where time likes to hide. I flick the lamp on, and its glow spreads slow and golden, pushing the corners of the room back into soft shadow. I reach for the rib fragment first, its familiar curve fitting my palm like an old promise, I run my thumb along its edge, feeling the cool line, where ancient muscle once pressed bone against breath. I think about breath more than I used to, how it moves through ribs, through spines, how it lifts us up and folds us down, how one day it leaves quietly, and the bones stay behind to remember. I drag the brush over the ribs, slow, steady, each stroke lifting a thin trail of grit that floats into the lamplight like dust from an old book cracked open after years on a forgotten shelf. The hush gathers around the motion, the sound of bristles against fossil, as soft as the rain on the roof outside. The forest listens too, or I like to believe it does, its dark canopy leaning close to the window where drops slide down the glass in crooked lines. I set the rib beside the spine, watch how their shapes echo each other even though they never belong to the same creature, the same age, the same dream. I think about how these bones traveled through time alone, and now rest together on this table under this lamp, under my small breath that brushes them awake. I pick up the notebook and open it to the last line, hush, still there, the word I return to when my thoughts stray too far into questions that do not need answers tonight. I write a few words about the rib, its length, the way it feels heavier in my palm than it should, as if it holds more than stone, as if it remembers the weight of something I will never name. I write about the rain too, how it feels like the echo of rivers that once carved secrets into beds of clay and sand, how it hums through the trees carrying whispers of roots that twist under my feet when I walk the narrow path from the house to this lab. I pause, pen hovering above the page, then glance at Kepler, who watches me now, eyes half-lidded, as if he knows I am trying to speak to something I cannot see. I smile at him. The hush folds around that smile, holds it steady until it softens into the quiet again. I reach for the feather impression next, its shape no bigger than my thumb, yet carrying the delicate line of a world that once breathed warmth and wind into plumage. I brush it, careful not to tear the fragile ridges that press into stone like veins under thin skin. I imagine the creature that dropped this feather somewhere in the hush of a swamp or forest canopy, maybe shaking itself dry after rain, just like this, maybe settling into the crook of a branch, eyes blinking slow as it tucked its head under a wing, safe for a moment from teeth and claws and the hungry patience of the world. I think about wings, how they lift bone and muscle into air, how they beat against the pull of gravity, how they fold down in the end, leaving only this trace for my hands to find. I place the feather beside the seed and feel a small tug in my chest at how these two shapes speak to each other, one a promise of flight, the other of roots, both soft, both stubborn, both reminders that life insists on pressing upward or outward or away from where it started. The rain grows steadier on the roof, its tap, tap, tap merging with the soft scratch of my pen as I write about the feather, about the hush that holds it, about how the hush holds me too, even when the world outside this lab seems to spin too fast under too many suns. I set the brush down and cradle the amber next, its smooth curve warm from the lamp, my fingers turning it until the trapped wing inside catches the glow. I wonder again about the moment that insect beat its last moment, hovering in sap that would harden into this golden bead I hold now. I wonder if it felt fear, or if it knew only the stickiness, the slow give of wings against resin until breath slipped away and time closed around it like a fist. I tilt the amber so the wing shifts just a fraction in the light, a fossil in its own small orbit, caught forever yet still so alive in the way it gleams. I write about that too, a line about how memory sometimes traps us in amber moments, moments we carry inside us like tiny fossils we brush awake when we stand alone at a window or sit here under a lamp listening to the hush say, stay a little longer. I look at Kepler again, his eyes now fully closed, his breathing slow and certain, his body trusting the warmth to keep him safe until the sun returns. I envy that trust some nights, but tonight I feel it too, the way the hush carries me, the way the lab holds my heartbeat inside these walls lined with field maps and old notebooks and stones that wait in drawers for my careful brush. I lean back and close my eyes for a moment. I see the riverbed where I found the spine, the quarry where the seed impression came free, the muddy bank where a rib waited under wet clay for my hands to lift it. Clear, I see the sky above each place, wide and indifferent, stars drifting beyond my reach, But somehow, always watching, I open my eyes again, run the brush once more along the rib, along the feather, along the edge of the spine, until the soft grit lifts into the hush that breathes around me like a promise that when the rain stops, when the roof dries, when the clock ticks into another hour that refuses to be named, these pieces will still be here waiting. The hush will still be here waiting. My breath will still find the rhythm of brush on bone, of pen on paper, of soft questions pressed into stone, where only the patient hush will ever hear the answers. I flick the lamp off, at last the glow folding into itself, the hush deepening until it is only the rain and Kepler slow dreaming, and my small promise that tomorrow I will open the door again, step inside again, lift each shape into light again, and listen again for what the hush wants to say. Ask ChatGPT. When I step into the sleepy lab tonight, I feel the hush greet me before I even flick on the lamp, as if it has been waiting behind the door, coiled in the corners, and the low beams that hold this old room together. The forest outside presses close tonight. I hear it in the shifting branches, the distant creak of trunks leaning with the wind, the soft scatter of needles falling onto damp ground. Kepler is already awake, his tiny shape perched under the warm bulb. His eyes blink once at me, slow, then close again, as if to say, this hush belongs to you too, do with it what you will. I set my bag down, careful not to bump the table where the fossils rest, each piece arranged not by size or age, but by the way they hum together. When the lamp spills its gold across them, the spine, the rib, the jaw, the teeth, the seed, the amber, the claw, the feather, each one a note in a quiet chord that only plays when the room breathes slow enough to hold it all. I flick the lamp on, and the circle of light spills wide, brushing the edges of old field notes, the soft line of my notebook, the brush waiting with its bristles bent and patient. I stand a moment, my hand hovering above the rib, feeling the cool breath of stone drift into my skin. It feels lighter tonight, or maybe my own bones feel heavier, pressed down by thoughts that cling like dust. I pick up the brush and draw it along the rib's curve, watching the faint grit lift into the hush and vanish like smoke. I think about how many times I have run this same brush along this same edge, how each pass feels like speaking the same word again and again, not to get an answer, but to keep the question soft and open. I set the rib aside and reach for the jawbone, its teeth catching the lamp's glow in dull glints that remind me of rivers slipping sunlight across rocks. I think about teeth more than I mean to, how they last, how they carry the echo of bite and tear, how they stand stubborn when all else folds back into the hush. I brush the line of teeth slowly, watching the grains of grit gather near the root, then drift away into the folds of cloth that cradle the fossil tonight. I want to believe this jaw once snapped shut around something alive, something warm that pushed back just enough to remind it that life is not just hunger, but the tension between holding on and letting go. I wonder if this creature knew fear, if its last breath caught on a leaf's edge or a claw's swipe, or if it lay down quiet beneath the hush of a wide canopy and let the dark close its eyes. I press the jawbone into my palm for a moment, feeling its shape settle against my skin, then lay it back on the cloth beside the rib, the spine, the seed, the amber, the feather. I open the notebook, find the last page where hush waits for me, written in my own hand, a word I never tire of seeing because it does not demand, it only invites. I write about the jaw, the way it feels heavier in my hand than it looks, the way the teeth hold secrets sharper than any blade I could ever lift. I pause, my pen hovering above the page, and listen to Kepler's small claws scratch once against glass, then still again. I listen to the wind catch at the eaves, the soft brush of pine against windowpanes, as if the trees lean in, curious about these bones I cradle under the lamp's steady breath. I think about the day I found the claw, how I dug for hours, my knees pressed into grit, my shoulders burned by sun, how the earth resisted giving up its secret until my blade slipped just right, and the shape revealed itself, a hook of bone that once meant survival or threat, or the soft catch of bark under a creature's weight. I lift the claw now, feeling its arc settle into my palm. It feels more like a question than an answer tonight. I wonder what it held onto, what it tore free, what it clutched in sleep or hunger, or the startled jerk of fear when shadows shifted wrong. I brush its tip, careful not to scratch the old stone that clings to its base. I watch the grit drift down into the hush around my elbows. I think about how claws And teeth and ribs and spines all circle the same promise, that life insists, that life resists, that life folds itself into the hush. When it is done with the sharpness of breath, I set the claw beside the others, their shapes soft together under the lamp's watch. I lean back, letting my shoulders press into the old chair that creaks under the small weight of my thoughts. I glance at the clock, its hands drifting slow behind the hour, behind the night, behind everything the world outside wants to measure. I am glad for that. The clock's stubborn refusal to keep pace feels like the hush itself, reminding me that this room does not belong to minutes. It belongs to breath, to dust, to the soft scrape of bristles pulling secrets from stone. I pick up the feather impression, neck so delicate. I hold my breath as I lift it. Its lines catch the light, a ghost of flight pressed flat by time. I brush it slow, feeling the hush settle deeper, until the only sound is my own breath, a faint tap of Kepler's tail against glass. I imagine this feather lifted by wind, tangled in wet leaves, dropped to earth by a creature that never thought of the word fossil, only of warmth, hunger, nest, sky. I think about wings, how they bend air, how they carry weight, how they break or molt or fall away, how they remind the bones beneath them that there is more than earth, more than claws, more than teeth, that there is lift, that there is drift, that there is the hush between the ground and the stars where feathers float when no one names them. I place the feather beside the seed and the amber, a small chorus of soft things that once reached up instead of down. I close my eyes for a breath, listening to the hush, listening to the forest press its voice against the walls, a voice older than my brush, older than my questions, older than the fossils that rest beneath my fingertips. I open my eyes again, pick up the brush one last time, and run it along the spine, feeling its ridges catch the bristles, the soft sound of grit drifting free. I imagine this spine bending under muscle, under hide. I imagine breath moving through ribs anchored to this curve. I imagine the hush wrapping that breath, wrapping my own, until there is no distance between the creature that was and the creature I am now, sitting here under a lamp that hums like a small sun. I write that down to my pen, scratching slow across the paper. I write about the hush, about how it feels like roots pressing through soil, how it carries me when the world outside forgets to be gentle, how it hums in the space between brush and bone, how it promises me there is more to find, more to hold, more to wake slow enough to hear. I close the notebook, leave the pen uncapped, the brush resting on the edge of the table, the lamp circles soft around all of it. Kepler breathes his steady breath, the forest breathes its restless hush, and I sit in the middle of it all, feeling the quiet hum of stone in my hands, reminding me that tomorrow the hush will wait for me to come back and lift it into light again. Ask ChatGPT. Tonight, when I cross the short path to the sleepy lab, the sky above the trees feels wider than it did yesterday, as if the stars have drifted just a little closer to listen in on what waits behind these old walls. The wind carries a hush that rattles pine needles and tugs at the edges of my sleeves, but when I open the door, that hush folds inward, joining the warmth that breathes from the lamp. The moment I flick its switch, the glow spills across the worktable, spilling across rib, spine, jaw, seed, claw, amber teeth, feathered, each fragment steady in its small place, each one humming a note only I seem to hear. Kepler lifts his head when the door clicks, his eyes glint for a moment, then sink shut again, as if to say, you know your way here, I trust you to keep the hush whole. I stand at the table, my palms resting on the wood, feeling its roughness press back into my skin. I close my eyes for a breath, listening to the hush fill the cracks in my thoughts the way water fills the lines in stone, soft but steady enough to reshape them. If given time, I let that hush settle my shoulders before I reach for the brush, its bristles worn thin from so many nights of coaxing dust from bones that have not moved in 100 million breaths. I pick up the jawbone first tonight, letting my thumb trace the line where teeth hold on after everything else has gone. I think about how teeth last longer than almost anything, how they carry the shape of bite and the echo of hunger, how they speak without a sound. I drag the brush along the row of dull points, the grit lifting under the lamplight, floating off my wrist into the hush. I imagine the creature's last meal, the crack of bone, the tear of muscle, the heat of breath in the soft dark where it paused between one life and the long hush that folded it down into the earth. I set the jaw aside near the rib where their edges seem to lean toward each other, the curve of life pressed close to the curve of memory. I open my notebook, find hush waiting in the last line where I left it. The pen feels warm in my hand, already shaped to my grip from hours bent over pages that hold sketches and single words and questions that drift like dust. I write about the jaw, its quiet thread, its patient silence, the way it reminds me that all things end, but not everything is lost. I lift the rib, next press its length into my palm, feeling its cool weight like a thought that keeps circling back. I brush its curves slowly, watching tiny veins of grit lift and scatter across the cloth. Beneath it, I wonder if this rib ever broke while the creature lived, if it healed jagged inside a chest that rose and fell with the slow work of breath, if pain pressed into its days the way worry sometimes presses into mine and leaves a shadow even after it slips away. I think about breath more than I say out loud, about how it moves through bone and muscle, how it leaves us so quietly. One last exhale, folding into the hush that keeps secrets better than any field journal. I place the rib next to the spine, feeling the soft click as they settle side by side, strangers and kin at once. I write about that too, a line that says even what was never connected can still belong together under the right light, under the right hush. I lean back, letting the hush press around me. The wind outside pushes branches against the roof, a soft scrape that sounds like claws brushing bark, or the rough whisper of leaves folding into each other. I glance at Kepler, who shifts once, tail curling tighter as if the night's voice drifts through his dreams too. I envy that trust, that small surrender to warmth and shadow, but I find it too in the way I sit here brushing dust from stone, asking nothing more than that the hush stay with me while I listen. I reach for the spine, its ridged arc fitting my palm like a question. I have learned not to rush. I drag the brush down its notches, feeling each tiny groove catch the bristles. I think about how spines carry weight, how they bend and hold and bear the push and pull of breath and fear and motion. I think about how mine holds the shape of this room, how my own bones feel softer when I lean over this table, tracing time into light. I wonder if one day someone will lift my spine from the hush, press their thumb along each ridge, and ask, what did you carry, what did you hold, what did you keep hidden under all the gentle weight? I set the spine back beside the rib, the jaw, the hush holding their edges together like roots meeting under dark soil. I write about that too, the line catching the soft scratch of the pen against old paper, a sound that fills the hush instead of breaking it. I lift the claw next, its curve sharp even now, the point catching the lamp's glow as if it remembers how to tear. I brush along its edge, careful not to dull the ancient bite hidden in that arc. I think about how claws protect, how they wound, how they hold tight when the world shifts underfoot. I wonder what this claw last grip, bark, flesh, the side of a nest where breath waited to be fed. I imagine it curved tight around something small and living, something warm that trusted the hush until the hush became all it knew. I set the claw down and reach for the seed impression, its weight almost nothing in my palm, yet its shape carrying more promise than any tooth or bone. I brush its faint veins, watching dust drift like pollen in lamplight. I think about how seeds trust the dark, how they split themselves open to rise through soil, how they hold the shape of forests not yet born. I place it by the feather, the amber, the small breath of life reaching up and out while claws and teeth pull down. I write that too, a line about how roots and wings are both kinds of hush, the kind that holds, the kind that lifts. The hush does not choose, it only keeps watch over both. I run the brush one last time along the rib, the spine, the jaw, the claw, the seed, the feather, the amber, the small teeth, each shape answering the bristles with a silence that says more than any answer I could find outside. The forest leans closer, its hush pressing through the cracks in these old walls. The clock ticks slow behind the hour that never comes. Kepler breathes a soft curl of trust that holds me steady, while the lamp hums warm over my wrist. I close the notebook, but leave the pen ready. The hush promises it will be here tomorrow. The bones promise too. I stand for a moment, hand on the lamp, feeling the circle of light fade under my fingers, as if the hush has slipped back into the dark roots and wings, claws and teeth, seeds and ribs, breath and silence. The hush keeps them all. The hush keeps me too. Ask ChatGPT. Tonight, when I open the door to the sleepy lab, I feel the weight of the air waiting for me, as if the hush has grown thicker in my absence, carrying the soft breath of pine and damp earth that drifts in from the forest just beyond the thin walls. I step inside, careful not to let the door slam, though I know it never does. The latch finds its place with a click that folds into the hush, like a stone dropped into a deep pool. Kepler is awake before I turn to look, his eyes bright in the lamplight. Even though the lamp has not yet flicked on, he watches my every move from his branched tail curled around the warm rock that holds the last heat of the day. I nod to him, my small greeting, part of the ritual that keeps this hush whole. I flick the lamp on, and its circle widens slow and sure, catching the edges of the fossils spread across the table: the rib, the spine, the jaw, the seed, the claw, the amber, the feather, the small teeth, all of them arranged as if they drifted here on their own, carried by an old river that knew how to place its secrets just so. I run my hand along the edge of the table, feeling the nicks and dents carved by other nights like this. Each mark a soft reminder that time lives here too, in the scratches and stains, the small burns where a lamp once felt too close. I pick up the brush, its handle warm from the lamp's hum, its bristles splayed soft as moss from so many nights lifting grit from stone. I reach for the spine tonight first, its length fitting my palm like a line of thought that has circled back to me again. I drag the brush along its ridges slow enough that I feel each groove catch the bristles, tiny veins of dust lifting into the hush to settle somewhere I will not see. I think about how spines hold us upright, how they bend under our own weight, how they carry fear and strength both without complaint. I wonder what fear pressed into this spine, whether it shivered when shadows moved, or whether it simply held steady under the push and pull of muscle and breath. I set the spine back beside the rib, their edges almost touching, as if they remember that all bones belong to the same hush. Eventually, I open my notebook to the page where hush waits for me, still the word soft under my thumb, the word that reminds me to write not for answers, but for the small mercy of the question. I write about the spine, its patient curve, its secret strength, the way it hums under the lamp's breath. I pause, listening to Kepler shift his tail, tap, tap, tap against glass, a small percussion that reminds me life still stirs even when I sink too deep into the old quiet. I reach for the jaw next, its teeth catching the light like dull blades. I brush along the line where bone meets tooth, feeling the soft rasp that tells me grit still clings after all this time. I think about what those teeth last held, warm flesh, sinew, maybe the sweet crush of leaf or root in a swamp that steamed under a sun no one has seen for 100 million heartbeats. I imagine the jaw snapping shut, the tremor that must have run through the spine, the ribs expanding with breath that pressed life through bone. I imagine the hush closing over it all after the last exhale, folding teeth into soil, folding bone into sleep, folding time into itself, until this small circle of lamplight woke it again under my hand. I set the jaw near the spine, near the rib. I write about that too, a line about how teeth and bone share a promise that has nothing to do with me, yet everything to do with why I stand here brushing grit into hush night after night. I lift the claw next, its arc sharp, even in the hush, the point still willing to catch my skin if I forget how carefully I must hold it. I brush along the tip, feeling the fine scratch as stone gives way to bristle. I wonder what this claw gripped, a branch, a throat, the wet edge of a nest hidden under broad leaves. I wonder if it broke once, grew back, or stayed chipped and jagged, a story written in a single curve. I think about my own hands, about how they grip the brush, how they hold the jaw, how they cradle the hush. I set the claw down and rest my palm on the table, letting its cool grain anchor me in the now, where the clock above the door ticks behind the hour, unbothered by the world outside. I reach for the amber next, the piece warm from the lamp, already the trapped wing inside catching the glow like a spark that never goes out. I hold it to my eye and see the shape floating in resin, the thin line of vein, the ghost of motion frozen in a drop of sap that hardened around. It's slow and certain. I imagine the moment the insect twitched its wing, felt the pull of resin, sticky and sweet, the way it must have pushed and pushed until breath slipped quiet into the hush. I brush the surface of the amber, even though there is no grit left, only the soft memory of wings. The hush gathers around the brushstroke, as if it too remembers what air felt like when it first pressed through that tiny body. I place the amber near the seed where Life once promised to rise even as wings fell. I write about that too, a line about how breath folds into stone, how flight folds into hush, how all of it waits for the right touch to wake. I reach for the feather impression, its shape so faint I almost fear to lift it, yet my fingers find its weight almost nothing at all. I brush its surface, careful to follow the line of barbs, the hint of quill, the soft echo of lift that once carried a body from branch to branch through a world that smelled of rain and moss and unseen teeth. I think about wings, how they hold the hush above the ground, how they slip between shadows and light, how they trust the air to remember them even when the bones forget. I set the feather near the amber, the seed, the hush, holding all three like breath caught in a dream. Kepler shifts again, claws tapping glass. The forest leans closer outside, pressing its old whisper through the walls. I listen to it, feel it hum under the floorboards where roots press upward in places I cannot see. I close the notebook only for a moment, the brush resting against my wrist like a heartbeat, the lamp circles steady over ribs, spine, jaw, claw, seed, amber, feather, teeth, hush. I stand there breathing the hush, breathing the each fossil, still stone, still memory, still promise that tomorrow the door will open again, the lamp will spill gold again, the brush will lift grit again, the hush will hold all of it, all of me, long enough to remind the bones they are never really alone, long enough to remind me I am never really alone either. Ask ChatGPT. Tonight, when I step onto the path that leads to the sleepy lab, the air feels different, as if the hush has crept outside to meet me halfway. The forest leans close on both sides of the worn dirt trail, pine needles soft under my boots, the faint smell of damp earth rising with every step above the canopy. The sky holds the last edge of dusk, a thin blue seam where night waits patient and wide. I stand for a moment just outside the door, one hand resting on the old frame, feeling the wood cold against my palm, as if the walls remember every breath I have pressed into them. I close my eyes, listen to the hush, listening back the soft rustle of branches, the distant creak of trunks, the quiet pulse of my own heartbeat, reminding me that here the world slows into something more like a thought than a fact. I open the door and step inside. The lamp waits unlit, its shadow a pale circle stretched across the worktable, where each fossil rests right where I left it, rib, spine, jaw, claw, seed, amber, feather, teeth, each piece a small echo that hums louder when I breathe close enough to hear. Kepler watches from his perch, eyes half open, his throat pulses once, then settles into the same soft rhythm that fills the lab when the lamp flicks on and spills its glow across the stones, the brush, the scattered notes. I run my fingers along the edge of the table, feeling the ridges and grooves of old work scars pressed into the wood, the varnish thin in places from years of my elbows resting there. As I lean closer to listen to what the bones had to say, I pick up the brush without thinking, the motion so familiar now it feels like a second heartbeat. I choose the jaw tonight, its weight heavier than it looks, the teeth dull but still carrying the memory of bite. I drag the brush along the line of bone slow enough that the bristles catch in tiny cracks, lifting grit that is hidden there like a secret. I imagine the jaw snapping shut, a last breath caught behind it, the hush folding over that moment, sealing it under layers of mud, root, water, until time turned bite into memory and memory into stone. I think about my own jaw, how it clenches when the world outside pushes too close, how it holds words I do not always speak, how it softens when the hush reminds me I do not have to carry every question in my teeth. I set the jaw beside the rib, their edges almost touching, as if they remember each other even if they never belong to the same body. I open the notebook. Hush waits on the last line, the words soft under my pen like a door I open each time I write here. I scratch a note about the jaw, its stubborn curve, its quiet threat, the way it hums when the brush drags dust into the hush. Kepler shifts, his claws tap once against glass, his tail curls tighter around the branch where warmth collects. I look at him, think how simple his world is, heat, shadow, hunger, sleep, no questions, no old bones to cradle, only this moment pressed soft and whole into his small chest. I envy him and do not envy him both at once. I reach for the claw next, its arc catching the lamplight, sharp in places, worn in others. I brush its edge, careful not to slip the bristles over my own skin. I think about what this claw grip bark, the rough hide of prey, the soft bend of a branch waiting to cradle weight. I imagine it breaking once, growing back, or staying chipped, an old wound written in a curve that still knows how to hold tight. I wonder if I hold on the same way to memories, to fears, to the hush itself. The claw hums its answer into the brush. Bristles, the grit drifts down, catching in the folds of cloth that line the worktable. I set the claw beside the jaw, ribs, spine, a small family of shapes that speak the same language. When I listen close enough, I write about that too, a line about how sharpness lives next to softness, how bone carries both without needing to choose. I lift the seed next, so small it almost disappears in my palm. I run the brush across its faint veins, feel the hush thicken when the grit lifts away tiny flecks of old earth, drifting back into the air that holds this room together. I think about seeds, how they trust darkness, how they split themselves open when the hush is right, how they rise through soil, searching for warmth, for light, for the same breath that once pressed through ribs and spines. I place the seed beside the feather and the amber, small reminders that life does not always pull downward. Sometimes it lifts, sometimes it floats, sometimes it waits in a thin line pressed into stone, until a lamp hums to life, and a brush draws it back into the hush. I think about the amber next, its warmth surprising in my hand, the trapped wing inside catching the lamplight like a memory that never forgot how to shimmer. I tilt it slow, watch how the resin bends light around the tiny shape that once hovered above wide leaves or shallow pools. I imagine the wing beating faster and faster when the sap closed around it, the small panic, the slow drift into hush. I brush the surface anyway, even though there is no grit left to lift, only the promise that the hush holds breath too, not just bone. I rest the amber beside the seed, the feather, the small teeth that carry the shape of hunger tucked inside softness. I write about that too, how the hush keeps all of it in balance, how wings, roots, claws, teeth all speak the same truth. When I am quiet enough to listen, the hush folds thicker around my shoulders. The clock above the door ticks behind the hour. The wind slips through the trees, pressing its voice against the window glass, as if to remind me that this hush is older than the lamp, older than the brush, older than my questions. Kepler closes his eyes fully now, trusting that warmth will hold him until the world grows light again. I envy the trust, but tonight I feel it too, the way the hush keeps my breath slow, the way the bones remind me that not everything must be solved, that some shapes only ask to be seen, brushed clean, held in a circle of lamplight long enough to hum their memory into the walls. I run the brush along the spine, last its ridges, catching the bristles, the soft scratch of stone giving up its dust. I imagine the spine bending under weight, stretching under fear, holding steady under breath. I think about my own spine, how it curls over this table, how it anchors me to the hush that blooms in the space between brush and bone. I close the notebook, but leave the pen resting on the page, hush, waiting for tomorrow. The lamp's glow pools soft around jaw, claw, ribs, spine, seed, amber, feather, teeth. The forest leans closer, the roof creaks, the hush hums, and I stand there a moment longer, hand resting on the lamp, letting its warmth press into my skin. The hush presses back, reminding me that tomorrow the door will open again, and the small song of stone and bristle and breath will wait for me exactly as I left it, soft, whole, patient as the hush itself. Asked ChatGPT. Tonight, when I cross the path to the sleepy lab, the hush feels almost awake, as if the trees have leaned closer than before, their branches draping shadows over the narrow trail, their roots pressing under the soil to remind my feet that every step brings me deeper into a space where time folds in on itself. I pause just outside the door, one hand on the knob, one breath held long enough to feel the quiet settle under my ribs. The forest sighs around me, wind threading through pine needles with a voice that feels older than anything I keep inside these walls. When I step through the door, the hush follows, slipping over the threshold with the scent of damp bark and cold earth. Kepler lifts his head when he hears the soft click. His eyes catch the last edge of the porch light before they close again, trusting me to bring nothing loud into this place. I flick the lamp on, and its glow spills like warm water across the table, brushing the edges of the rib, the spine, the jaw, the claw, the seed, the amber, the feather, the small teeth, each piece humming its own note that rises just enough to remind me I am not alone in here. The brush waits where I left it, its bristles splayed like the soft edge of a moth's wing. I pick it up, feeling the shape of its handle press into my palm, familiar as breath. I reach for the feather impression tonight, its outline so faint, I almost fear my fingers will break it. But they don't. They lift it, gentle, holding the stone that carries this ghost of flight. I brush along the faint line where barbs once caught wind and water, where tiny drops might have clung before slipping free to darken the soil below. I imagine the creature that wore this feather lifting itself through ferns, its wings beating air warm with the smell of wet leaves and unseen streams. I wonder if it looked down from the canopy, its eyes catching shapes that meant hunger or safety, or the hush that holds both. I set the feather down beside the seed, the hush between them, soft enough to feel under my fingertips. I open the notebook, hush waiting in the last line. Like a breath I forgot to let go, I write about the feather, how it feels lighter than a word, how it reminds me that lift and fall are not opposites, but pieces of the same shape. I close my eyes for a moment, listening to Kepler shift his claws, tapping glass just once. The clock above the door ticks behind the hour, unbothered by minutes that mean nothing here. I reach for the jaw next, its teeth dull in the lamp's glow, but still holding the echo of bite. I brush along the row, careful not to press too hard. The bristles slip through the tiny spaces between roots and bone, lifting grit that clings like old questions. I wonder if this jaw ever snapped shut in fear or hunger, or if it held breath quiet and easy until the hush folded it down into the bed of a river that forgot its name. I think about my own jaw, how it clenches when I stand too long in places that do not know this hush, how it softens when I am here brushing stone, awake, asking nothing but for the night to hold me long enough to listen. I set the jaw beside the rib, its curve resting against another curve, both shaped by breath that left long before my breath ever found this room. I write about that too, how bones that never knew each other can lean close when the hush is right. I lift the rib next, my thumb sliding along its edge, feeling the faint groove where muscle once held it steady inside a chest that rose and fell under stars no one remembers. I brush its length, slow grid lifting in tiny arcs that catch the lamplight like dust caught in a sunbeam. I think about how ribs protect, how they bend and break and heal, how they hold inside them the quiet drum of a heart that never asked to last, but did anyway. I wonder if this rib ever cracked under the push of claw or the weight of earth, if it healed jagged like an old scar, or lay quiet waiting for roots to find it and wrap it in the hush. I set it back beside the jaw, the spine, the brush trembling a little between my fingers, not from fear, but from the soft ache that comes when the hush reminds me I am small, and that smallness is not something to fear. Kepler shifts again, his tail curling tighter, his eyes half open now, watching the hush that folds around my shoulders like a cloak. I smile at him, though he does not see it. I feel it press through the hush into his sleep. I reach for the spine next, its ridged arc fitting my palm the same way a thought fits behind my teeth, waiting to be spoken but never needing to be. I brush along its length, each notch catching the bristles, the soft scrape filling the hush with a sound that feels like a secret. I wonder how many storms this spine felt, how many times it bit under weight it did not choose, how many nights it held still while breath pressed through ribs, muscles, claws, teeth, all of it working together to keep life stitched tight around bone. I think about my own spine, how it bends over this table, how it bends under worry, how it straightens when I stand in the doorway of this lab and feel the hush press my feet into the floor like roots. I write that too, a line about spines and storms, and the way hush teaches me that breaking and holding can live in the same curve. I place the spine back near the rib, near the jaw, near the claw that waits for my hand, its arc sharp enough to catch the edge of thought. I lift the claw last tonight, its point pressing against my skin, reminding me that life does not ask permission to hold on. I brush along its curve, careful not to dull the small thread that still hums under its stone skin. I think about what this claw once gripped, bark, branch, prey, maybe even air itself, as it reached for balance in a world that did not promise safety, only the hush that waits when the fight is done. I wonder if I hold on too tight sometimes, if the hush forgives me for the way my hands curl into fists when the world outside rattles louder than I want it to. I set the claw down, the brush Soft against my wrist, the notebook still open, hush. Waiting to hold the last word, I write about the claw, how it teaches me to let go, how it hums the same song the feather sings, only sharper, only lower, only truer, in the way stone remembers what soft things forget. The lamp's glow feels warmer now, the hush thicker, the clock ticks slow. Kepler's eyes close, the hush breathes, my breath breathes, the brush rests on the table, the grit drifts down like snow that will never melt, and I stand there for a moment, letting all of it hold me until tomorrow comes. And the hush asks me to listen again. Ask ChatGPT. Tonight, when I cross from the dark curve of the forest path to the quiet mouth of the sleepy lab, I feel the hush rise to meet me like an old friend waiting, with its hands open, palms full of soft shadows, and the steady breath of old wood that has learned how to hold secrets without breaking them. The wind behind me rustles through the pines, carrying the hush deeper, until it slips under the door before I do, as if it knows this is where it belongs, inside the lab. The lamp waits dark, the fossils wait. In their small chorus of stone and memory and half-asked questions, Kepler lifts his head when the latch clicks, the soft weight of his eyes resting on me for a heartbeat before he lowers them again, trusting that this hush is safe, because I have never asked it to be anything else. I stand at the work table, and for a moment I do not flick the lamp on. I let my eyes find the shapes by memory: rib, spine, jaw, claw, seed, amber, feather, teeth, their edges softened by the dark, like bones seen through water. Where currents blur their true shape, the brush rests near the notebook, its bristles bent in a small arc that mirrors the curve of the claws and ribs it has kissed clean night after night. I run my thumb along the brush handle, and in that motion I feel every hour I have spent here, every breath held above the lamp's warm glow, every grain of grit lifted from a groove that once hid the small truth that the hush keeps. When the light goes out, I flick the lamp on. In the circle it spills feels warmer than usual, as if it too has waited for this moment to lean close and listen with me. I lift the jaw first, my palm curling under its weight, feeling the dull roots of its teeth pressing into my skin like the soft knock of an old question. I brush along the line where bone meets tooth, slow enough to feel the grit rise against the bristles. I imagine the last thing these teeth held, how they pressed down, how they locked life tight for one last moment before the hush folded it all away into the deep sleep under mud and leaf and time. I wonder if we are all jaws in the end, carrying the shape of our bite, the small proof that we once wanted more than sleep. I set the jaw down beside the rib, feeling the hush gather in the place where they touch, edge to edge, curve to curve, like cousins who have forgotten they share the same breath. I pick up the rib next, my thumb tracing the thin line that runs along its side, the place where once muscle pulled it open and closed, a soft gate that let breath slip through. I brush its length, watching grit drift off like a faint memory that does not mind being forgotten, if only it is held a moment longer in warm light. I think about how ribs hold things, and how they protect, how they break, how they heal, how even when they heal they do not pretend to be whole in the way they were before. I wonder if this rib ever healed, or if it settled into the hush with its crack still open, a doorway for roots and tiny rivers to slip through. I place the rib down near the spine, its curve bending toward the gentle ridge that runs along the spine's back, a line of old promises that never learned how to leave. I brush the spine next, the bristles catching each groove where time hid small grains of sleep. I think about how spines hold us upright, how they bend under weight, how they carry fear and hope at the same time, how they break when they must and still cradle us even after the breath that asked them to hold shape has gone. I wonder if my own spine hums the same way this one does under the hush, if it will one day rest under the same soft blanket of time, waiting for hands like mine to lift it into light again. I set the spine beside the rib, beside the jaw, and in that small cluster of stone I see the outline of something that once dreamed of ferns and warm mud and the hush that pressed close in the dark. I pick up the claw next, its arc familiar, the point still sharp enough to remind my skin that stone remembers threat long after the breath that gave it purpose is gone. I brush along its edge, careful to feel the fine rasp where the bristles catch. I imagine what this claw held, how it dug into bark or flesh or soft damp earth, how it clutched and tore and gripped, because to live is to hold on until the hush says enough. I wonder what I hold too tightly, what old claws I have buried under skin that curls around questions that do not always want answers. I place the claw down near the jaw, letting the sharp curve kiss the dull line of old teeth. Both shapes saying what they say without sound. I lift the seed next, almost nothing in my palm, its faint veins no heavier than breath. I brush its surface, tiny flecks of dust drifting away like pollen caught on wind that does not remember where it first began. I imagine this seed pressed into mud, hoping for warmth, hoping for rain, hoping for hush to break open its shell and push its small green mouth upward into light. I wonder if all things break open in the end, if the hush asks us to split so something softer can rise. I set the seed by the feather, impression its ghost of barbs catching the edge of the lamp circle. I brush the feather too gentle enough to feel how thin the stone holds the memory of lift. I imagine wings folding and opening, folding and opening, the hush between each beat, the place where flight is born and ends. I think about how wings trust the air to hold them, how they trust gravity to forgive them when they fall. I write that in the notebook too, hush still waiting at the margin where ink pools into the soft seam of paper. The amber comes last tonight, its smooth shape warm in my fingers, the trapped wing inside catching gold and throwing it back at me. I tilt it so the resin bends the light, and in that small bend I see my own shape reflected, a blur at the edge of a secret. I brush its surface, though there is no dust left, only the hush wrapped tight around an old breath that never asked to be saved. I wonder if the hush keeps all of us like this, trapped in small drops of memory, waiting for a hand to lift us to a lamp and say, I see you, even if I do not understand all of you. I place the amber down near the seed, the feather, the hush folds all of it together. The hush folds me too. The lamp hums, Kepler's breath hums, the clock above the door drifts slow behind the hour that waits for the sun. I close the notebook, but leave it open enough for tomorrow. The brush rests on the edge of the table, the fossils hum to each other in ways I almost hear. The hush says nothing, but I know what it means. Stay soft, stay listening, stay. The hush itself will keep the story breathing long after the lamp goes dark and the last word settles like dust into the slow, patient dream of stone. Ask ChatGPT.